Right, so let me start by saying I'm not proud of the kind of work I do. It's sketchy, it's dangerous, and it's definitely not legal. But hey, it pays well. And when you're 27, drowning in student loans and trying to keep your crappy studio apartment from becoming someone else's crappy studio apartment, you start to make compromises. You'd be surprised how fast your moral compass gets tossed out the window when rent's due. So, yeah, I'm a courier, not for FedEx or Amazon or anything like that. Those jobs would actually look good on a resume. I deliver for the dark web. You've probably heard the horror stories about the deep web, right? The black markets, the hitmen for hire, the human experiments. Most of it sounds fake, but trust me, it's not. I've seen enough to know it's all real, too real. Now, I'm not some big-time player. I'm not the guy orchestrating international drug trades or smuggling weapons. I'm just a cog in the machine. My job is simple. I pick up a package, no questions asked, and I deliver it to wherever it needs to go. Cash is always handed to me up front in a thick envelope, and I don't get involved with whatever's inside the box. That's the rule. Don't look, don't ask, just deliver. Until last week, I thought I was pretty good at keeping my head down. I was careful, and I always avoided the jobs that seemed too shady, even by my standards. But then I got a text, not an email, not a message on one of those encrypted dark web forums, but an actual text. It just said, "You're being considered for a special delivery. Reply YES to confirm availability." Now, normally that would have been my first red flag. These jobs never come through my personal phone. But the payday, mentioned in the follow-up message, made me ignore my gut. Let's just say it was enough money to not only pay off my rent, but maybe even wipe out a chunk of my student loans. A 5-figure payout for one job? I mean, how do you say no to that? I replied, yes. And about an hour later, I got the details. Pickup was at an old, abandoned church on the edge of town, one of those creepy Gothic ones with the shattered stained glass windows. The delivery? A storage unit at a facility 3 states over. Sounded simple enough. I showed up at the church at midnight, as instructed. The place was lit only by a single flickering street lamp, and the air smelled like mildew and rotting wood. There was this eerie silence, too. No cars driving by, no animals, not even the sound of the wind. Just silence. As I walked up to the doors, I noticed they weren't locked. I mean, who would bother locking up a place like this? The inside was just as creepy as you'd imagine. Dusty pews, cobwebs everywhere, and a massive, crumbling crucifix hanging lopsided behind the altar. But what really gave me the chills was the figure standing in the middle of the room. It was a man dressed in all black, black hoodie, black jeans, even black gloves. I couldn't see his face because he was wearing one of those plain white masks like the kind you'd wear for a bad Halloween costume. He was holding a black box about the size of a shoebox, and the second I walked in, he turned toward me like he'd been waiting. "You're late," he said, his voice muffled by the mask. "Traffic," I lied. He didn't laugh, he didn't even move. He just stood there, holding the box out in front of him. I tried to play it cool as I walked up and took it. But the second I touched the box, I froze. It was warm. Not just warm, hot. Like it had been sitting on a radiator all night. I almost dropped it, but I managed to keep my grip. The masked guy didn't seem to notice my reaction, or maybe he just didn't care. "Do not open it," he said. "Do not listen to it. Deliver it within 24 hours, or you will not survive the consequences." Now, normally I would have laughed at that. I mean, I've heard all kinds of melodramatic warnings before. But there was something in his tone, something cold and final, that made me shut my mouth. I nodded, shoved the box into my backpack, and got out of there as fast as I could. Here's the thing, I should have walked away right then and there. I should have chucked that box into the nearest dumpster and called it a night. But 5 figures is 5 figures, and I really, really needed the money. So I got in my car and started driving. The first hour of the trip was uneventful, just me, the highway, and some late-night true crime podcasts to keep me awake. But around 2 a.m. things started to get weird. The box began to make noises. At first, it was subtle, just a faint scratching like something was shifting inside. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just my imagination, but then it got louder. The scratching turned into tapping, then banging like whatever was in there was trying to get out. I pulled over at a rest stop, heart racing, and grabbed the box out of my bag. It felt heavier now, and the heat was even worse, like it was burning through the fabric of my backpack. I held it up to my ear, and that's when I heard it. Whispering. I don't know how else to describe it. It wasn't in English or any language I recognized, but it was low and raspy, like someone whispering right into my ear. And then it said my name. I swear to God, it said my name. That was it. That was the moment I decided this job wasn't worth it. I shoved the box back into my bag, jumped in my car, and sped off, ignoring every speed limit sign along the way. I just wanted to get this over with and get that box as far away from me as possible. But as I kept driving, I realized something terrifying. No matter how far I went, no matter how fast I drove, the whispering didn't stop. It was inside my head now. So after I got back in the car, things just went from bad to worse. I was driving like a maniac down this empty stretch of highway, my hands gripping the wheel so tight that my knuckles were turning white. My phone was blowing up in the passenger seat, notifications popping up one after another, but I wasn't about to stop and check them. Not with that thing whispering my name on repeat like some kind of creepy broken record in the back of my head. The whispers weren't constant, though. Sometimes they'd stop for a few seconds, just long enough for me to catch my breath, but then they'd start again, louder and clearer each time. At one point, it almost sounded like someone was sitting in the back seat, leaning forward and breathing right into my ear. I turned the music up, to drown it out. I figured blasting some top 40 or whatever Spotify threw at me would help, but no. The second I cranked up the volume, the radio started glitching out. The song, some Dua Lipa track I think, kept skipping, like the signal was cutting in and out. And then the radio whispered my name. I slammed on the brakes so hard I almost sent myself flying through the windshield. My car skidded to a stop in the middle of the road, tires screeching loud enough to echo across the empty fields on either side of me. When I finally caught my breath, I looked around. The highway was completely deserted, not a single car in sight. Just me, the flickering glow of my headlights, and the black box sitting heavy in my backpack. I decided to pull over. There was no point in driving if I couldn't even think straight. I found this random dirt patch just off the road and parked there, leaving the engine running so I wouldn't be sitting in complete darkness. At this point, I was sweating buckets. The heat from the box had soaked through my bag, and it felt like it was burning a hole into my back. I grabbed it, threw it onto the passenger seat, and just stared at it for a while, trying to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do. I'll be honest, I was tempted to open it. I know the guy at the church said not to, but I figured maybe if I saw what was inside, I could, reason with it? Maybe it was an animal, or some kind of weird prank. I mean, it couldn't really be alive, right? Not in the way I was imagining, but just as I reached for the lid, my phone buzzed. I grabbed it without thinking, grateful for the distraction, but when I looked at the screen, my stomach dropped. It was a text from an unknown number. Keep driving. That was it. Just 2 words. I sat there, frozen, my thumb hovering over the screen. And then another message came through. Do not stop. Do not open the box. Do not make us come to you. I swear to God, I felt my heart skip a beat. My first thought was, how the hell do they know I stopped? There was no one around. No cameras, no other cars, nothing. It was just me in that creepy-ass box. But before I could even start to process it, a third message popped up. This one wasn't words, though. It was a picture. It was a photo of my car parked exactly where I was sitting. I didn't waste another second. I shoved the phone into my pocket, threw the car into drive, and peeled back onto the highway. My hands were shaking so bad that I could barely keep the wheel straight. As I drove, I started noticing things that I hadn't seen before. The trees lining the side of the road. They didn't look right. Their branches were twisted, almost like they were reaching toward the car. And the stars overhead, they weren't there anymore. It was just black, like someone had thrown a tarp over the entire sky. Even the road itself felt wrong. It was like no matter how far I drove, I wasn't getting anywhere. The mile markers kept repeating. 132, 133, 134, and then back to 132. It didn't make sense. At one point, I passed a McDonald's that looked off. The golden arches were dim, and the sign out front was flickering. I could barely make out the text, but it looked like someone had spray painted over it. Instead of over 99 billion served, it said, "No one gets out." That was when I realized I wasn't on a normal highway anymore. I thought about pulling over again, but I didn't want to risk another creepy text or photo, so I just kept driving, gripping the wheel like it was the only thing tethering me to reality. The box was still whispering my name, but now it was saying other things too, things I couldn't understand. The words sounded old, like something you'd hear in a museum exhibit about ancient civilizations. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, the box started moving. I heard a faint thud from the passenger seat, and when I glanced over, I saw it shifting, like something inside was pushing against the sides. I slammed on the brakes again, this time pulling over so fast that my car nearly spun out. I grabbed the box, ready to chuck it into the woods, but as soon as I touched it, the whispering stopped, and then the lid began to slide open on its own. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't stop myself. It was like my body wasn't mine anymore. My hands moved on their own, holding the box steady as the lid lifted higher and higher. Inside there was nothing, at first anyway. But then I saw it. A pair of eyes, glowing, bloodshot eyes, staring up at me from the darkness. And then it spoke. Not in whispers this time, but in a deep, guttural voice that shook me to my core. "You should have kept driving." So there I was, standing in the middle of nowhere, with this black box on my lap, and a pair of glowing, bloodshot eyes staring up at me. My brain was screaming at me to toss it into the trees and drive until I hit Canada, but my body wouldn't move. I just sat there, frozen, like some kind of invisible force was holding me in place. The voice, it wasn't human. It was deep and distorted, like a recording played backward through blown-out speakers, and what it said next chilled me to my core. "You've already failed." The air around me seemed to get heavier, pressing down on my chest until I could barely breathe. The headlights from my car flickered and dimmed, leaving me in this weird, suffocating semi-darkness. The box started to shake violently in my hands, and I swear I could feel something alive moving inside, like it was trying to claw its way out. But then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The eyes vanished, the lid snapped shut on its own, and the weight in the air lifted. For a second, I thought maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. Maybe the stress and lack of sleep were making me hallucinate. But when I looked down at my hands, I saw something that told me this was all very, very real. My palms were covered in scratches, deep, jagged scratches, like I'd been gripping a handful of barbed wire. I didn't even bother cleaning myself up. I threw the box back into the passenger seat, slammed the door shut, and floored it. I didn't care about the delivery anymore. Screw the money, screw the rules. I just wanted to get the hell away from whatever the hell this was. But the second I got back on the road, my phone started buzzing again. Another text. I didn't want to look at it, I really didn't, but curiosity got the better of me. When I glanced at the screen, my heart sank. It was another picture. This time, it wasn't my car, it was me, sitting in the driver's seat, gripping the wheel, my face pale and drenched in sweat. Whoever was taking these pictures wasn't just watching me, they were right there, in the car with me. I slammed on the brakes again and jumped out, spinning around like a lunatic, trying to spot whoever was messing with me. But there was no one there. The road was empty, the trees were still, and my car looked completely normal, except for one thing. The box. The lid was open again, just a crack, and this faint, black mist was seeping out. It wasn't smoke, it moved too deliberately for that. It swirled and twisted in the air, like it was alive, and I swear it was watching me. I backed away, my heart pounding in my chest. That's when I noticed something else. The scratches on my palms weren't just scratches anymore, they were moving. The cuts shifted and twisted like worms burrowing under my skin, forming strange, looping patterns that didn't make any sense. It hurt like hell, but no matter how much I rubbed at them, they wouldn't stop. The mist from the box seemed to notice. It drifted closer, like it was curious, and as it got near my hands, the patterns started glowing faintly. That's when the whispering started again. It wasn't coming from the box this time. It was coming from everywhere. The trees, the road, the sky. It all seemed to hum with this low, guttural chant. I couldn't make out the words, but I knew they weren't meant for me. They were meant for whatever was in the box. The mist started to coalesce, forming this weird, humanoid shape right there in front of me. It didn't have a face, but I could feel it staring at me. And then it spoke. "Finish the delivery." Its voice wasn't deep or distorted like before. It was cold, like metal scraping against ice. I shook my head, backing up toward the car. "Number, I'm done. I don't care about the money. I don't care about any of this." The thing tilted its head like it was confused, and then it said something that stopped me dead in my tracks. "It's not about the money, it's about you." I don't know why, but those words hit me like a punch to the gut. The thing in the mist wasn't threatening me, it was mocking me, like it knew something I didn't. I wanted to run, but where was I going to go? I was miles from the nearest town, on a road that might not even exist anymore. So I did the only thing I could think of. I got back in the car and slammed the door shut. The mist didn't follow me, it just hovered there, watching, as I peeled out onto the road. I drove for what felt like hours, my knuckles bleeding from how tightly I was gripping the wheel. The box was silent now, and the road seemed normal again, but I knew better than to let my guard down. Eventually, I spotted a sign for a gas station up ahead, a little rundown place with flickering neon lights. It wasn't much, but it was the first sign of civilization I'd seen in hours, so I pulled in. The place was deserted, of course. The lights were on, but there was no one behind the counter, no cars in the lot. I grabbed my phone, hoping to call for help, but it was dead. Completely drained, even though it had been at 80% just an hour ago. That's when I saw it. A piece of paper taped to the door. It wasn't a menu or a notice about hours, it was a photo of me, standing in the parking lot, staring at the door. I turned around, expecting to see someone, anyone, but the lot was empty. Just my car and the dim glow of the gas station lights. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen, before I finally worked up the courage to walk back to the car. The box was sitting exactly where I'd left it, completely still. But when I opened the driver's side door, there was something new sitting on the seat beside it. A note. In big, blocky letters it said, "Do not stop again." I didn't stop again after that note. Not because I wanted to keep going, but because I was too scared to disobey. Whatever this was, it wasn't just some sick prank or a bad dream. It was real, and it wanted something from me. As I drove away from the gas station, the highway started to change. Subtly at first, just little things that made me do double takes. The asphalt was darker, almost wet-looking, even though it hadn't rained. The reflectors on the road looked cracked, like tiny spiderwebs of glass. And the trees? The trees were taller, impossibly tall, their branches forming a dense canopy overhead that blocked out the moonlight completely. It felt like I was driving through a tunnel carved into the forest. I kept my eyes on the road, trying to ignore the fact that the mile markers didn't make sense anymore. I'd pass one that said 180, then another that said 72, then one that just said question mark. And the black box, it was humming now. Not loudly, just a low, barely there vibration that I could feel in my chest more than hear. It wasn't moving or shaking anymore, but it felt alive, like it was waiting for something. At one point I glanced in my rearview mirror and almost drove off the road. There was something in the back seat. It wasn't a person. It wasn't even a shadow, really. It was more like an absence, a dark, writhing void that seemed to eat away at the light around it. The longer I stared, the more it felt like it was staring back, even though it didn't have eyes. I wanted to pull over and jump out of the car, but the memory of that note was burned into my brain. Do not stop again. So I did the only thing I could. I kept driving. The thing in the back seat didn't move. It just sat there, silent and still, like it was part of the car now. Every so often I'd glance back at it, and it would seem a little closer, like it was creeping forward an inch at a time. The whispers started up again too, but this time they weren't coming from the box. They were coming from inside the car. I couldn't make out most of the words. It was like 100 voices speaking at once, overlapping and garbled, but every now and then I'd catch bits and pieces. Not far now. He's almost ready. Do you see it yet? I tried to block it out by turning the radio back on, but all I got was static. And then, buried deep in the static, I heard something that made my skin crawl. It was my own voice. It wasn't a recording. It was live. I heard myself, clear as day, screaming into the static, "Get me out of here! Please, someone help me, I can't do this anymore!" My hands started shaking so badly I could barely keep the car straight. I reached for the dial to turn the radio off, but before I could, the voice stopped. And then something else came through. A single word, whispered so softly I almost missed it. "Look." I didn't want to look. I really didn't. But something, curiosity, fear, whatever, made me glance at the passenger seat. The box was glowing now. A faint, sickly green light seeped out from the edges of the lid, casting eerie shadows across the dashboard. I tried to ignore it, but the light was getting brighter, pulsing like a heartbeat. And then the lid started to open. Not slowly, like before. This time, it flew open with a force that sent the box tumbling onto the floor. The glow filled the car, blinding me for a second, and I had to slam on the brakes to avoid crashing into whatever was ahead of me. When the light faded, I saw something sitting where the box had been. It wasn't an object. It was a hand. The hand was pale, almost translucent, with long, spindly fingers that ended in sharp, black nails. It was just sitting there on the seat, like it had been waiting for me to notice it. And then it moved. I swear to God it moved. The fingers twitched, curling into a fist, then unfurling again like it was stretching after a long nap. I wanted to get out of the car. I wanted to run, but my body wouldn't move. The hand slowly lifted off the seat, floating in the air like it was weightless. It hovered there for a moment, and then it pointed, straight ahead. I didn't know what it was pointing at. There was nothing in front of me but more road, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was supposed to follow it. The whispers in the car got louder, overlapping with the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. The hand drifted toward the dashboard, tapping its nails against the glass, urging me forward. So, I drove. The road started to change again. The trees on either side of me seemed to lean in closer, their branches twisting together into these strange, skeletal shapes. The asphalt beneath my tires cracked and splintered, glowing faintly with the same sickly green light as the box. And then I saw it. Up ahead, in the middle of the road, was a figure. At first, I thought it was just a person, someone walking along the highway, maybe a hitchhiker or some stranded driver. But as I got closer, I realized it wasn't human. Its body was impossibly thin, almost skeletal, and it was wrapped in these tattered black robes that billowed even though there was no wind. Its face, if you could call it that, was just a blank, featureless void, except for two glowing eyes that stared straight at me. The hand in my car started tapping faster, more urgently, like it wanted me to stop. But I couldn't. I wouldn't. I slammed my foot down on the gas, determined to plow right through whatever this thing was and get the hell out of there. But as soon as I got close, the figure raised one bony hand and pointed straight at me. The car died. The engine cut out, the lights flickered off, and the whole thing skidded to a stop like it had hit an invisible wall. And then the figure started walking toward me. The figure walked toward my car with slow, deliberate steps, its tattered robes trailing behind it like smoke. I couldn't move. I couldn't think. All I could do was stare at those glowing eyes, locked in place, like they had me in some kind of trance. The hand in the passenger seat was now frantically tapping the dashboard, its nails scraping against the plastic, hard enough to leave gouges. It was pointing straight at the box, which was back on the seat somehow, glowing brighter than ever. I didn't even remember putting it there. The whispers in the car had stopped now, replaced by a low, vibrating hum that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The figure outside reached the front of the car and stopped, its featureless face tilted slightly to the side like it was studying me. Then, without warning, it raised its arm and slammed its hand down on the hood of the car. The metal crumpled like it was made of tin foil, and the sound was deafening, a metallic screech that made my teeth ache. My headlights flickered once, then went out completely, plunging me into darkness. And then the car doors unlocked. I don't know why I didn't run. Maybe I was too scared, or maybe something was keeping me there, forcing me to stay. Either way, I just sat there, gripping the steering wheel, as the figure moved toward the driver's side door. It didn't open the door. It didn't have to. The door swung open on its own, creaking loudly, and the thing just stood there, staring down at me with those impossible eyes. And then it spoke. Its voice wasn't loud or deep or distorted. It was quiet, almost gentle, but it cut through the air like a knife. "You are late." The words sent a chill down my spine, and I felt my throat go dry. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but no sound came out. The figure tilted its head again, almost like it was disappointed. Then it reached into the car, its skeletal hand wrapping around the black box. The second it touched the box, the glow vanished. The whispers, the humming, the heat, it was all gone, like someone had flipped a switch. For a brief moment, I felt a flicker of relief. Maybe this was it. Maybe it was over. But then the figure turned its head toward me. "You didn't finish the delivery," it said, and this time its voice was different, harsh, accusing. I tried," I stammered, finally finding my voice. "I didn't stop. It cut me off with a single, chilling sentence. You opened it. The hand in the passenger seat, the one that had been tapping and pointing, suddenly grabbed my arm. Its grip was ice cold, and it felt like needles were stabbing into my skin. I tried to pull away, but it was too strong. The figure outside leaned in closer, its blank face inches from mine. I couldn't see a mouth, but I could feel its breath, cold and damp like a draft from a crypt. "The deal is broken," it said, and I swear I felt the words as much as I heard them. And then the box started shaking again. It fell to the floor, rattling violently, and the glow returned, brighter this time, almost blinding. The lid flew open, and something inside started to rise. At first, I thought it was just more of that black mist, but then I saw it. Long, thin limbs, sharp and angular, unfolding like a spider crawling out of a hole. Its body was twisted and wrong, bending in ways that made my stomach churn. And its face, if you could call it that, was a mass of writhing tendrils with two glowing eyes at the center. The thing in the box was alive, and it was angry. The figure outside took a step back, almost like it was bowing, and the creature from the box turned its glowing eyes on me. For a split second, everything went silent. The whispers, the humming, even my own heartbeat, it all just stopped. And then it spoke. Not in words, but in feelings. Waves of rage and hunger and despair that washed over me like a tidal wave. I felt like I was drowning in it, my body shaking uncontrollably as the thing leaned closer. I don't know how I found the strength to move, but somehow I did. I grabbed the box, practically burning my hands in the process, and threw it out of the car as hard as I could. The second it hit the ground, the creature shrieked, a high-pitched, ear-splitting sound that made the entire car vibrate. The figure in black stepped toward it, reaching out with those skeletal hands, but it was too late. The creature dissolved into mist, swirling violently around the box before vanishing completely, and then, just like that, it was over. The figure turned to look at me one last time. It didn't say anything, but I could feel its disappointment, like a heavy weight pressing down on my chest. Then it bent down, picked up the box, and walked back into the darkness. I sat there for what felt like hours, my hands shaking, my ears ringing, trying to process what had just happened. Eventually the car lights flickered back on and the engine roared to life. I didn't question it. I just drove. When I finally got home, the sun was starting to rise. I parked the car in the lot outside my apartment and just sat there for a while, staring at the scratches on my hands. They were still there, but they weren't moving anymore. They'd formed a pattern now, a strange, circular symbol I didn't recognize. I don't know what it means, but I know one thing for sure. This isn't over. The box is gone, but I can still feel it, somewhere out there, waiting. And every now and then when I'm alone, I still hear it, whispering my name.